Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host Korey Gunz, along with Sportskeeda's wrestling expert and our resident birthday boy today, Tom Colohue. Tom, how are you doing?
You had to bring that up, didn't you? You have to make a fuss, bless you. I'm doing good, although I think you'll know that I'm not looking forward to the eye for an eye match when you consider me and Jeff Hardy's ear have a long-standing issue. So, doing good, but not looking forward to certain things like seeing someone lose an eye.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in just a minute, and we're going to talk about some other things that happened this past Monday night on Raw. We're going to start, though, with the big return of Heath Slater. He's got kids, and apparently they got to see him on Raw at least one more time. He comes out, cuts a really good promo, I thought, getting involved in the Drew McIntyre-Dolph Ziggler angle, but cuts a really great promo. He looks like he's in great shape, and I thought it was really interesting storytelling and really an innovative idea to bring Heath back. He was a guy that was released from the company and is still released, as far as we know, from the company, but to bring him back and play off his history with Drew and get him involved in this angle with Dolph Ziggler going into Extreme Rules. So I thought it was very well done. What can you tell us as far as the agreement between Heath and WWE? How did all this come together that we ended up seeing him making a surprise appearance on Raw this past Monday?
Well, naturally, they knew Heath Slater was available. They knew he had history with Drew McIntyre and Dolph Ziggler. And of course, because Dolph was brought in quite late in the day, they haven't really got that much planned for Drew McIntyre in the time to really build it up. It was a one-time deal. It gives Heath Slater himself a payday while he's unable to wrestle elsewhere because of his non-compete clause. Now, Heath is one of those who's open in saying that he felt it was his own fault he was released due to a lack of effort and motivation. I still remember back in his original free agent run when he didn't get drafted to either brand, and we got him in matches with Randy Orton and Brock Lesnar trying to win a contract. That, I felt, was incredible work that really wasn't followed up on as well as it could have been, in my opinion. Clearly he's taken it seriously this time because he looks incredible. He hasn't been offered a new contract, to my knowledge, but I know a lot of people backstage were very impressed, as well as the wrestlers as well. But with a performance like this, it's not impossible that a new contract will be offered. That said, I'm pretty sure he already has a deal offered by another company.
Interesting. Could this be a way of maybe WWE trying to, are they maybe second-guessing themselves, maybe thinking, hey, maybe we gave up on this guy a little bit too quickly and maybe trying to throw a olive branch or a carrot out there for him to maybe get him back in the fold at some point to keep him from going somewhere else?
It's possible. They have offered a number of contracts to people who were released, but at less income. So a lot of people weren't interested in taking them. To my knowledge, Heath Slater was not one of those people, and he's someone that they don't want to bring back to the company. I think that's a shame, but we are where we are. That said, if Heath Slater was offered a new deal, I think he can do better, to be honest.
Now, in his promo on Monday, storyline-wise, he was talking to Drew about, that Drew was supposed to look out for him and that he was supposed to petition the office to get a title match, for Heath and to have a match with him. Any of what we saw on Monday, a little bit of possibly art imitating life, was this maybe a little bit of a favor to Drew to bring his buddy back at least for one more, good payday on Monday Night Raw, considering the COVID era and the things that are going on? And obviously Drew is the WWE champion, so, could he have been throwing a little bit of his stroke around to try to get Heath back in the fold and back on TV?
That's pretty much exactly what happened. All of Heath Slater's promo was the exact opposite of what had actually happened, and they scripted that knowing that was the case. Drew, as soon as he won the championship, and even beforehand, wanted to try and get feuds going with Heath Slater and with Jinder Mahal, and I've reported about that with Jinder Mahal right here on this channel and this podcast. While it's not technically a favour to Drew, as in they're not really trying to help him along, and he's really just trying to work with his friends and help their careers, this is one way that he is able to support them, and it's in a way that they're able to keep storylines going, because quite often champions do get to choose their challengers until they get to the big matches where championships could change hands. For example, Seth Rollins, for example, whatever is coming up at SummerSlam.
Now, you mentioned Jinder Mahal, and like you said, we've talked about him on this show before, that before the latest injury for him, it did seem like the plan was to build him back up and eventually have a feud between him and Drew, playing off of their history together in 3MB and things like that. Drew's being built up as a fighting champion, and it does seem that maybe because of the Jinder injury and other things, that maybe they've already starting to scramble for opponents for him. Dolph was brought over from SmackDown in the trade for AJ Styles. Any thought that maybe Heath could just be slid into that Jinder Mahal position? He was a member of 3MB as well, so maybe we just see an interchange that Jinder's out and maybe Heath Slater is in?
It's not impossible, but with Heath Slater under offer from different companies, I think he'll be signing with them and not returning to the WWE. So while there is no offer on the table from the WWE at the moment, I definitely can't see them using him after this, at least until he's gone away, got buff, worked on the indies, and come back to truly reform buff 3MB.
Yeah. What's your opinion on release talent doing these types of one-offs? When somebody effectively loses their job or a company says to them, we don't have anything for you, or we no longer value you as part of the company, do you think it's better for that talent to, if they are approached with a one-off, to take a stand against the WWE and say, hey, I'm not going to come in. You didn't think I was good enough to give me a contract. You fired me, so I'm not going to come in and do a favor essentially for you and try to, promote your next pay-per-view and advance this storyline? Or do you subscribe to the thought that, hey, any exposure is good exposure, and if WWE wants to put you on television for a couple of minutes on a Monday night, hey, you take that offer, anytime you can get it? What's your opinion on maybe the way that some of these released talents should handle these situations when the WWE kind of comes calling back on their doorstep?
I think it depends on the talent in question. Rusev, for example, they were trying to pitch him new contracts to make him sign a new deal, even in the days right before he was released. If someone has set their mind on leaving, they will leave. In addition, there are people who were paid severance, who had signed deals, quite lucrative deals, not long before being released. They took the money. If they then did another date, they could potentially have to pay some of that back. So it really depends on who it is that is in that position. Heath Slater, as I've mentioned, is one of those who looked into himself and said, have I let myself down here? This was a chance for vindication. This was a chance for closure. And really, in wrestling, the most important thing is visibility. This will make a positive impact on Heath's career chances and might add some weight to the wage he can command in the future. And if he wasn't happy to do it, he certainly wouldn't.
Now, in addition to surprise appearances on Raw, not only Heath Slater showing up, but also Kairi Sane was on the show. And the last time we'd really seen her talked about on social media and kind of in the news cycle was that her contract had expired and that she wasn't going to re-sign with the company and that she'd probably be heading off back to Japan. Then Monday rolls around, and here she is. She's back. She's backing up Asuka, and she's featured pretty prominently in her own singles match and also in the main event of Asuka and Bayley. What can you tell us about the details surrounding her contract situation and kind of what the WWE's thoughts are about her moving forward?
Kairi Sane's contract has technically lapsed, but it very much is a technicality. It's been extended for injury time because she's had time off unavailable, and that's a typical thing that the WWE will do to ensure that you have your full term of contract served, including whatever injury time just being put to the side. So she still has a few days left to wrestle. The WWE do plan to offer her a new contract as a wrestler with a deal that might be quite lucrative. They'll give her a push in the meantime and essentially give her whatever she wants to try and make her sign it. But her intention, as far as I'm aware and as far as she is told to WWE, is to return to Japan regardless. The WWE has suggested the role of NXT Japan as a way to keep her from signing anywhere else. And NXT Japan, while it hasn't launched yet, it was supposed to be at least announced by this time, if not for the current circumstances.
New Japan, we've seen they just now started up their shows again, really in the last week. They had been on hiatus with all the COVID stuff as well, so they just now kind of got back up and running in the past week or so. Not only just with someone like Kairi, but really anyone whose contract is coming up, or maybe some of these release talent. Does the fact that New Japan seems to be kind of back open for business, does that have any effect on the WWE, or maybe cause the WWE any worry that some of these contracts that are coming up, they may be more likely to leave, because now it's not just AEW or maybe an Impact that they could go to, but now, New Japan is back open for business as well?
It doesn't cause any undue concern. Ultimately, they chose to release whatever wrestlers they felt they could do without, whereas someone like Kairi Sane is someone they definitely wanted to keep. However, she hasn't had the strongest push in the WWE, and really the jewel in the crown there is Asuka. So while they do want to keep Kairi Sane, they're not prepared to break the bank for her. With New Japan opening up, there are a number of talent who will definitely cast envious eyes there, but I'm not sure what the situation is and to how easy it would be to fly from America to Japan right now. So it might be a little while yet. And certainly that is a concern with someone like Rey Mysterio, who was working in New Japan right before he signed his WWE contract.
Well, let's talk about Rey Mysterio. I know this has been the topic you've looked forward to talking about all day, and that is the eye for an eye match that was announced that will take place at Extreme Rules between Rey Mysterio and Seth Rollins. Now, on Monday, you may have been thinking to yourself, what exactly will an eye for an eye match be? And the WWE released the official stipulation on WWE.com today, and it says, quote, "The gory stipulation where a winner can only be determined by extracting the opponent's eye." What the heck is going on, Tom?
I wish I could tell you. For a couple of weeks now, if you've been watching my Raw and SmackDown reviews on my YouTube channel, you'll know that I've been saying it's going to be an eye for an eye match. It sounds ridiculous. The reason it sounds ridiculous is because it's ridiculous. Now, I don't make the rules. In some circumstances, I really wish I did, but I'm just here to report news. I don't want to see someone lose an eye. I know there's going to be some editing magic involved, but I just don't want to see it. As much as I want to see Seth Rollins in an eye patch, I think that's unfair on a lot of people because I think he's already too attractive, and that's just going to make it worse for me.
Yeah, I mean, to put this out in... I mean, this is out there now. I mean, it's not something they can kind of change the rules on the night of. I mean, it's there in text on WWE.com. Extracting the opponent's eye. It doesn't even mean that they have to, bust the eye open. Extract means to pull out. So, I mean, how are they going to find their way out of this other than, hey, somebody's got to pull an eyeball out of somebody's skull?
I have no idea how they're going to make this happen. I look forward to whatever inventive method they come up with, but I also really don't want to see any eye stuff. In the last few weeks, we've had so much weird stuff, so much foot stuff, and now it's eye stuff. WWE's getting weird, man.
And urine. We've seen urine stuff,
God, bodily fluids in every direction. I don't want it.
I don't. It is becoming a horror show, man. They were right with this tagline. Maybe they saw what was coming because it's definitely leaning that direction. Now, speaking of Rey Mysterio, we just kind of touched on this, kind of a similar situation with Kairi Sane. Rey Mysterio, it came out last week that his contract with the WWE is also technically up. It has expired. Obviously, he's still working with the company. He's got this big match coming up with Seth Rollins at Extreme Rules. What can you tell us about kind of this, I don't know, I guess maybe a handshake deal between Rey Mysterio and the WWE that he's working on right now?
Since the COVID-19 era came into play, the WWE have been a lot less willing to grant contract extensions. A lot of this comes down to the fact that there aren't really many people who are active right now or companies that they can go to outside of, for example, Impact or MLW, for example. When it comes to that, we have people like Kairi Sane and Rey Mysterio who aren't being offered lucrative new deals that you would expect, and that includes Rey Mysterio. There are a lot of easy out clauses in his contract. Again, we've discussed this on the podcast a number of times. He's looking for this to be his last contract, and he was looking for the ideal opponent to retire against. We mentioned one possibility of that would have been this year's WrestleMania against Andrade. For the moment, Mysterio is working without a contract, meaning he's essentially determining his own wage because the WWE now have to pay him whatever he wants whenever they expect him to turn up, and they don't want him to vanish during such a key storyline. Raising tension long term, to my knowledge, is to ensure that Dominic gets the training and debut that was promised to him, and afterwards, as far as I know, Rey Mysterio is still looking to retire. So if they can hurry that along, there is no need for a new contract.
Let's move on to another development we saw in Raw between MVP and potentially Cedric Alexander. We saw them talking backstage. MVP already is, I guess, the manager or at least an associate of Bobby Lashley. Could we be looking at a situation where maybe MVP is looking to build his own stable and kind of become the face and mouthpiece of a new group of superstars? We saw him talking to Cedric Alexander. He's got Bobby Lashley, maybe even Ricochet possibly could be a candidate. What could you tell us about MVP's role on Monday Night Raw?
MVP seems interested in Cedric Alexander, but not Ricochet at the moment. That said, in wrestling, that means either one could turn heel in the line of MVP, so who knows? But MVP has been pitching a stable since way back in January. Slowly, the WWE have been more and more convinced of his value to the company, and especially with the current situation, he's been absolutely invaluable, so I would be shocked if he didn't get what he wants.
Now, also on Monday, MVP had a role in unveiling the new United States title. It got a little bit of a facelift and a brand new design for the United States Championship, and I personally thought it was pretty cool. I really like the callback to the WCW design with the eagle at the bottom is very reminiscent of the U.S. title design that was used by WCW, which up to this point, and really I think even still, is probably my favorite U.S. title design. The one thing I do hate, though, is just the huge champion lettering that they use. I don't know why that had to be so big. I think when you're wearing a title like that, it's pretty much assumed that you're a champion of something, so I don't know why the text of champion had to be so large. But other than that, I was a pretty big fan of the design, that notwithstanding. What'd you think of the new belt? Were you a fan? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I can't say I was a fan myself, but to be fair, I'm not exactly the target audience being British. What I will say is I'm sure it will grow on me. When they released some new images of it in different lighting and so on, it did grow on me, but there were some very strange shapes in there that were very confusing at first, and with the glare on it, I worry about how many towns it's going to burn down on a hot day. Now, this is the fourth design they tried to my knowledge. There is likely going to be more. It's why the rumours have gone on for so long. They just couldn't settle on what they wanted it to look like. I got to say, you should see all the other trial designs. They're just on a design of floor somewhere, and some of them are quite out there.
Yeah, I'm sure some of those will probably turn up on social media or something at some point, which would probably be pretty interesting to see. WWE's definitely been a little bit more outlandish with their designs, with the U.S. title, the redesign of the Intercontinental title, and I think it's still going to take me longer to get used to the new IC title as opposed to the U.S. title. I'm not a fan of the Intercontinental Championship. This one I can live with, but I was not happy when they decided to just overhaul the Intercontinental Championship.
I don't mind the design, but I think it only suits certain people. It suits Shinsuke Nakamura.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure it suits AJ Styles, but it's not the worst option. Daniel Bryan, it really doesn't suit.
Well, let's move on. We're already into July, so that means that we're quickly approaching the biggest party of the summer, which is SummerSlam. That'll be coming up in August. But it seems that maybe it's going to be not quite the SummerSlam that the WWE had envisioned or maybe wanted, because it appears, according to reports, that SummerSlam is going to occur at the Performance Center, as of with all of their pay-per-views recently. There was some talk that SummerSlam may be the first event post-COVID that would be held in front of fans in an arena, and it was said that was probably the WWE's preference. How close, if at all, was the event to being held in front of fans in any capacity whatsoever?
Very close, and I do mean very, very close. Brock Lesnar was booked. Security has been spoken to about the best ways to keep the crowd spread out as necessary for social distancing. They did not want to make this decision, and there are very, very upset people about it.
How disappointed is Vince, him personally, specifically, that they're going to have SummerSlam at the Performance Center and not be able to have it in an arena?
Very, very disappointed. As far as Vince McMahon is concerned, from everything I'm being told, he wants to get back to normal as soon as possible. And he subscribes to the idea that we all have to learn to live with coronavirus now, so let's just get back to it. We will see in the coming months whether he pushes for that, but with the current circumstances, particularly in America, I can't see crowds coming back for a long time.
Will the fact that it's at the PC have any effect on the booking for the event? Like you mentioned Brock Lesnar, being booked for the event. Now that it's going to be at the Performance Center, not in an arena with a paying crowd, could that have any effect? Could they decide, well, we're not going to bring Brock in and use that as one of his dates if it's not going to have, the biggest impact possible? So could there be some decisions that are made because of the fact that it's being held in the PC and not in an arena?
It's possible. I won't say for definite whether or not Brock Lesnar will be there, because at this point I don't know. They could very well cancel that appearance and save his dates for this year until next year and just have a lot of Brock Lesnar next year. I don't think anybody would have an issue with that because he'd work a nearly full-time schedule. That said, when it comes to working at the Performance Center, they really don't want Brock working there. It really doesn't help the image that he is a larger-than-life and larger-than WWE character when there is no one there to cheer or boo. And also, one of the big deals that they love with Brock is that he gets both cheered and booed. You won't get that from a pocket crowd.
And I get the sense, I don't know for sure, obviously, but I also get the sense from that Brock is the kind of guy that if it's not going to be in front of a crowd and if it's not going to be kind of that larger-than-life presentation, that he'd probably rather just stay up north on his farm or whatever it is. He secludes himself when he's off and just not even make the trip if he's just going to come and perform at the PC in front of nobody.
I know that's a popular perception, but if Brock Lesnar got asked to come down to an NXT rerun that was bound to get less than 20,000 views, he would come down. He would come for the payday, and he would come because of the respect he has for Vince McMahon. The relationship between Brock Lesnar and Vince McMahon is very similar to the relationship between The Undertaker and Vince McMahon.
Let's go back a little bit of ways, and I do want to touch on something that happened on Friday Night SmackDown. It seems that this Jeff Hardy-Sheamus angle is going to continue, and in fact, it was what closed the show on Friday. And a lot of people on social media, including our own Sportskeeda journalist Gary Cassidy, among others, on social media were a bit critical of this storyline, and especially critical of the fact that that is what was used to close the show. What are your thoughts on just this angle as a whole? I mean, I know we talked about it a little bit before the last pay-per-view, and we kind of thought that would be the end of it during that Jeff Hardy-Sheamus match. Sheamus got the win. We thought, okay, we're moving on, but it looks like obviously WWE's chosen to continue this and move forward with it. What have been your thoughts over the past couple weeks seeing this angle that takes very real life situations and real life events in Jeff Hardy's life and turning them into a storyline on television?
Personally, it's my least favorite storyline right now in all of wrestling, but I expect they're going to keep going until Google results are all storyline and non-real life. We do have the advantage of having our own Gary Cassidy really on top of the subject. He is our hashtag piss guy. He knows all about the urine angles, and really, it's been a long time since we've had such a wonderful expert in urine-based WWE storylines, and really someone who knows all about throwing piss and having piss thrown. That this is really the cream of the crop, if the cream of the crop was covered in urine. This is our guy, and really, he has the inside track of everything going on, really the hot take, the real beat, and there is just a constant stream of hot news coming our way from this guy. The worst part of this whole storyline is that Jeff Hardy is really unlikely to pick up any actual wins. He's been buried on his way out the door because they cannot convince him to sign a new contract. He just doesn't seem interested. If they can convince him, they will probably start writing storylines that actually work in his favour. But really, right now, this doesn't suit anyone.
How long did you work on all those urine puns for that answer?
Not for 1 second. They all came to me at the time. You can tell by how long it took me to get to the hot stream pun.
Now, I do want to ask, this whole storyline, okay, the recovering addict, the recovering alcoholic, we've seen it before. I mean, we saw it back as far back as 1996. We saw Jake Roberts and Jerry Lawler. That was the basis behind their whole feud. Jake was coming back from his addictions and his demons, and we saw Jerry Lawler pour whiskey down his throat. We saw it even involving Jeff Hardy before in his feud with CM Punk, the whole straight edge society thing. We've kind of seen this angle even with Jeff involved before. And I know a lot of people will say, well, they're using this because, to draw attention. They want to make it a hero story. They want to showcase a guy like Jeff Hardy overcoming his demons and his addictions and coming out on top. But to your point, if he's on his way out the door and he's not going to go over at the end of the storyline, it kind of defeats that purpose. So is this just lazy writing for the creative team to say, oh, Jeff Hardy, he's had a couple of DUIs on his record. Hey, let's make an angle about how he's an alcohol addict and Sheamus is trying to, get him off the wagon. I mean, is this just really just lazy writing on the behalf of the creative team?
There are a number of writers who prefer to take real-life events and turn them into storylines, and they've been doing this for years. Chief amongst them is not a writer, it is Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon loves this storyline and wants to keep it going. And of course, it being Vince McMahon, he will get what he wants.
Yeah, like I said, it seems like it's been done before. It's been done before with Jeff, and I'm sure they wouldn't be doing this if he wasn't on board with it. I'm sure he gave it the okay to move forward, but part of me almost feels sorry for him that they're going back to this well again with his personal life. And like I said, if he doesn't come out on top at the end and doesn't, come out triumphant over Sheamus, then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of why you would do a storyline like this in the first place, other than to just, expose a guy or put a guy's, demons and difficulties just out there for the world to see. I don't know. I'm not really sure how to feel about it. I said, I guess I'll see how it wraps up. But if it does end up that Jeff Hardy gets buried again and then is just on his way out, we never see him again, I'm not really sure what purpose this served in the first place.
I agree with you completely. I need to see a strong finish here, because otherwise, what was the point of the whole thing? Like I've said, I don't think anyone gets the benefit of this. I don't think Sheamus is particularly comfortable with this, but that is just my opinion. And I don't think it boosts him as any sort of monster heel, even if he does win every match along the way. This isn't a good look for anyone, especially when they are literally dripping with urine. Or, in fact, in Jeff's case, where he attacked an innocent man, because Sheamus, of course, wasn't there, one of many people who hasn't been there for the past couple of weeks. But what I think everyone should do is, if they're unhappy with this particular segment, this particular storyline, if you want to write a tweet to @WrestlingGary, which is our colleague Gary Cassidy with that inside track, and let him know that as the piss guy, he needs to put a stop to it. He needs to stop the piss. #stop the piss.
I'm sure Gary's going to love us for this episode of the podcast.
I hope so. I've never put him over this strongly.
That's true.
Never.
You haven't.
And I feel these are important moments in the development of our company and our friendship. Gary, I love you and your piss guy antics.
Let's do a couple little quick bits here to kind of wrap up the show. Just a couple of interesting topics. First of all, today, as we record this, which is June 7th, today is the anniversary of the infamous Hulk Hogan heel turn. Back at Bash at the Beach in 1996, Hogan turns heel. He joins the NWO, and then, of course, WCW is off to the races for the next couple of years off of the NWO storyline. How different do you think WCW's history, Hogan's career, the debut of Hall and Nash. I mean, a lot of ground that we could probably cover there, but just how different do you think the existence of WCW would have been had it not been for Hogan making the decision to take the plunge and to turn heel at Bash at the Beach back in '96?
I think we are actually being quite narrow to think that it would be just WCW that would be different. Because without that three-member NWO, those particular three, I don't think the WWF at the time would have been scared into creating the Attitude Era. I don't think that would have happened. So I think the WWF would have been in trouble without that happening. That said, while I think Hall and Nash would have succeeded and the NWO would have succeeded with the original idea of Sting turning heel, I'm not sure WCW would have, because I suspect they would have kept pushing Hulk Hogan as a face in front of a crowd that really weren't there for it anymore. And at the same time, they'd be trying to push Sting as a heel in front of a crowd that didn't want to see it. I think wrestling would be different. I think wrestling would be worse.
I agree with you on all points there. I think, I know there's, they've talked about that Sting was kind of the backup plan. People have said that maybe there were some overtures made to Bret Hart around the time about coming in and being that third guy, but I agree with you. I don't think it could have been anyone but Hogan in order for it to have the impact and the success that it did. I'm not sure any other threesome other than those three, at least in the beginning, would have worked. I think it had to be Hogan, and to his credit, he was smart enough to kind of catch the train as it was leaving the station. And I mean, he's always on top of things. He's going to do what kind of generates the most cash, and he took a little bit of a risk here, but I think obviously it paid off for him, and to take that heel turn. I think it's still probably the most iconic and well remembered heel turn probably of all time in wrestling.
We can say a lot of things about Hulk Hogan. A lot of things. I can sit here and say things about Hulk Hogan, just things about Hulk Hogan for days. But you always have to say that he is a very smart and very self-aware man.
Let's talk about AEW for a minute. You sent out what I thought was an interesting tweet over the weekend, just kind of asking your social media followers to chime in about who you thought was the AEW MVP right now, the guy that AEW could least afford to lose from their company. And I'm going to let you kind of, I know you answered it on Twitter, but kind of tell everybody who your choice was, and then I'm going to tell you who my choice is, and then kind of get your thoughts. But so you go first. Tell me, who is your pick as kind of the MVP for AEW right now?
I actually didn't answer this one on Twitter because usually in these ones I just want to see what other people believe. For a while back, I asked the question about who people felt was the best women's wrestler in the world, and in the end, we get a tie between Sasha Banks and Io Shirai. That was end of last year, and we finally had the match, and my God, was it good. So things like that are questions I really like asking on Twitter. Of the answers I got, the most common answers were Jon Moxley and Chris Jericho. Now, Chris Jericho has undoubtedly been integral to the launch of AEW. However, I do think Jon Moxley is what has made AEW cool, which sounds so strange coming out of the mouth of me as a guy who is a professional wrestling journalist and is just naturally uncool. But I would say Jon Moxley added that cool factor, like the NWO, just to touch on the previous point. Like the NWO added the cool factor, like Drew McIntyre adds a cool factor. So while I think there are people who have given more to the company, AEW really, I feel, would not have been anywhere near as successful without being able to sign Jon Moxley.
Yeah, I agree that Moxley's probably their biggest impact signing. I know Jericho is probably a little bit of the easy answer because he's going to get those eyes on the screen. He's going to draw in the sponsors because he's a known commodity. He's a wrestling star. He's a rock star. So if you looked at it from that viewpoint, I could consider Jericho. But when I thought about your question, I thought in terms of, okay, if AEW, what would be the biggest hit to AEW for someone that is in their company now to leave? which would have the biggest impact, negative impact on their image and on their brand. And I kind of thought that it would be Cody Rhodes. And the reason I thought that is because, he's a guy that obviously he's one of the kind of the founding fathers of AEW. He thought that there was a space there for a company to rise up and compete with WWE. He's taken a lot of indirect and sometimes direct shots at the WWE on their pay-per-views and on their shows. We saw him even at Fyter Fest wearing the Great American Bash inspired t-shirt, with the Great American Nightmare on it and things of that nature. So I really think that if a guy like Cody Rhodes were to leave AEW, a lot of fans would probably take that as him saying, hey, this was a lost cause, we can't compete, WWE is the king of wrestling and there's just no use fighting against the current. And so to me, Cody Rhodes would be, in my opinion, AEW's MVP and would be the guy that they could least afford to lose right now because of the way that it would directly impact their image and probably the way that it's viewed by fans, because it's like, hey, if Cody Rhodes doesn't think this is worth sticking around for, then what's the use in me, tuning in and checking it out?
I get what you're saying. Jon Moxley does add that cool factor, but Cody Rhodes has been the face of AEW, not just front of house, but back of house as well. He's a guy that everything goes through. He's a guy in the conference calls. He's a guy that has everything loaded on his shoulders. He'd definitely be a miss.
Last thing before we wrap up things tonight, a couple of questions that we got on Twitter, and both of these come from @Noob&Company, and both deal with the women's division over on Raw right now. First question he asked is, if Asuka loses the Raw Women's title to Sasha at Extreme Rules, will it hurt her push?
It definitely would. If Asuka loses the championship to Sasha, then that championship is going to be tied up in the Sasha and Bayley storyline for months going ahead. So Asuka really wouldn't be able to chase the championship as much. I think Asuka will have a long and successful title run, thankfully.
And then secondly, with Kairi Sane back, will it be enough to help further Asuka's current push on Raw?
Asuka's current push is going extremely well. I think really it doesn't need to be furthered, as it were. It just needs to be allowed to continue without interference. Kairi Sane will add a couple of different match possibilities, which will keep things fresh and interesting, but she won't be an integral part of that push because, of course, she would have to sign a new contract to do so.
Well, there you go. Another edition of Dropkick Discussions in the books for this week. We appreciate you all tuning in. Please make sure that you are liking and commenting and sharing this week's video with all of your fellow wrestling fans, and make sure that you subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to Tom's personal YouTube channel as well. You can follow Tom on Twitter @Colohue. And if you didn't know until this podcast that it was his birthday this week, go ahead and send him a happy birthday tweet. I'm sure he would appreciate even the belated wishes. And since he doesn't want it to be a big deal, it would be funny if we try to make it as big of a deal as possible. So
cheers, mate, yeah.
So make sure you give him some good wishes over on Twitter. You can follow me @Korey Gunz if you would like. And also make sure that you check out Sportskeeda.com for the latest wrestling news and articles. We thank you for joining us again this week. We will see you next time on the next Dropkick Discussions presented by Sportskeeda.